Hello, welcome to a long, daring tradition, Alta Ranch. I am streaming to you live from in front of the Bolcoff Adobe, which is behind me here. And while we wait for a few more people to tune in, I want to just take a quick opportunity to give a little bit of updates on trail statuses, what's currently open, where you can visit and recreate safely while abiding by the current rules. So, currently, Wilder Ranch is open to the public. Trails are open, and you can go out onto the trails as long as you are maintaining social distance, not traveling big groups, covering your face, bringing any sanitation supplies, hand sanitizer, things like that. Where there are limitations is beach access, and that's from 11 till 5 p.m. Otherwise, you can access all the trails. The parking lot is currently it's about half of the spaces are open for parking. Every other space is closed to maintain distancing while people are in the lot, and also to prevent overcrowding in the park itself. So by abiding by these rules, we can continue to keep our park open to the public and allow people to continue recreating in this wonderful resource. So I thank everyone who's been abiding by all these rules and doing your best to stay safe and also enjoy nature and the outdoors as summer is upon us now. So here we are, and it's a beautiful day, Memorial Day weekend, so happy Memorial Day to everyone. It is bright and sunny, and I guess I don't need my face mask, at least while I do this program. So the last thing I want to do before getting too deep into today's history, which is about kind of the origins of dairying here on what is now Wilder Ranch. And I come to you in front of the Bolcoff Adobe, and this is the oldest standing structure here at Wilder Ranch. And it's something we all get to when you get to visit the park, if you haven't done so yourself yet. You walk through the historic complex and kind of are brought back in time looking at these really incredible historic buildings. And they're this reminder that help us kind of, with that transportation back in time, to feel like we're in that time that these buildings are from. But what can be important, and here we have the oldest standing structure, something that can be important to think about too is those evidences that maybe come from before the time where Westerners were building in these California sites, and that there really are these records we can see of the indigenous people that have lived here for thousands of years. So here we're standing in front of a building built in about 1839, so not quite 200 years old, but pretty old for California standards on structures that have been built. But there's evidences around us that we can see that might take a little bit more close paying attention to kind of take a step back and think about, well, how this landscape was kind of built or co-evolved with the humans that lived here. And one just example of that, I'm going to pull this over here just a little bit. Is this buckeye tree behind me. You can see it's the flowering tree. Now, before the Wilders lived on this property, right about where I'm standing right now, actually, is where a creek would have gone by, so Wilder Creek. That buckeye tree, the buckeyes were actually used by the indigenous people of this area, and what they were doing is they would be taking the bulbs of those buckeye, and they contain in them a neurotoxin, and they would use them for fishing in the water. So here we know there's a stream that used to be here. We have a buckeye tree, and that we know is quite old. And we can start thinking about, well, maybe this is kind of an evidence of that, that interdependence between the people and the landscape, and that perhaps the people discovered that these buckeyes were stunning the fish because they live near the water, or possibly this tree would have been planted unintentionally by people carrying those seed pods to the water. So we look around and we see these evidences, and you can see it when you hike on any of the backcountry trails in Wilder. We have these open fields, and these open fields have partially, been created by hundreds and hundreds of years of fire management, where they're burning the landscape, keeping down the larger growth, and allowing these rich grasslands to come up. So we can look around us and see these evidences. And I bring this up today because we're looking at the oldest building here at Wilder Ranch, to remember that it goes back further than that, and to take this as a moment to acknowledge the Awaswa-speaking Yupi people who've called this their ancestral homeland for thousands of years, and that they remain involved in our stewardship and land management practices today. And so I do encourage you, if you'd like to know more about the efforts of the contemporary indigenous people in stewarding this land, check out the Alma Mutsun Tribal Band, and you can check out their website. It's an incredible resource. All right, so just get lighting all right there. Okay, so that's going to work for us today. So I want to jump into now talking about the kind of the genesis, the beginning of dairying here in this part of California, really. So the story, and this is a fun story to go with, because with a lot of the different oral histories we have some pretty good written record when we talk about the Wilders. But we're going back before the Wilders, and while there are some written records about the things I'm going to say today, some of it's a little bit more contested. And so I'm going to tell you the information that I've done my best research to find, but take everything with a grain of salt, understanding this has been passed down for a long time. But the story I want to get into is one that starts, of all places, in Siberia. So there's a man, his name is Osip Volkov, and he's born in a remote region of Siberia, becomes a fur trader, and makes his way all the way to California. And in 1815, jumps ship in Monterey. Now he jumps ship, and Bolcoff actually becomes quite successful. And one of the key reasons that's going to come up in all of his different successes is his ability to read and write. And we might not see that as something that would qualify someone just automatically to be high up in society. But on the frontiers of California, you land in 1815, and your ability to read and write would have been extremely useful. So he learns Spanish, converts to Catholicism, and then changes his name. So he changes his name from Osip Volkov to Jose Antonio Bolcoff. And he's appointed as the interpreter for the governor at that time in Monterey, which would have been the capital of Alta California. So he gets this employment and starts working his way up. And then he marries into a very wealthy family of the time in Mexican California, Alta California, and that was the Castro family. And he married the youngest Castro daughter, Maria Candida Castro. This was 1822. So 1822, he marries into this family, and the Castros have a very rich legacy history of that Mexican California period, and they came originally on the second Anza expedition and had extremely large land grants. So if you're tuning in, probably anywhere from at least around the Bay Area, you probably have some evidence in near backyard that links back to the Castros. So whether it's the Castro Adobe, their historic home, which is now a state park and while isn't open on a regular basis, can be visited during their open houses. That's located down in Watsonville. Whether it's Castroville, where you might get your artichokes from, Castro Valley out in the East Bay, Castro District, Castro Street in San Francisco. This family left down an incredibly rich legacy that stands today. So Bolcoff, he marries into this family, and he moves to an area that's now just a street or a district of Santa Cruz called Branciforte. But he actually, in 1833, he's elected the alcalde, or mayor, of Branciforte. So at that time it was its own town. And he ends up being reelected actually on 3 separate occasions. So he becomes somewhat of a prominent local figure in politics and business as well. So 1833, he's the mayor. 1839 is a big year for the family of the Bolcoffs and the Castros, as they're related to the Bolcoffs at least. So remember, Bolcoff is married to the youngest of the Castro's daughters. 3 Castro daughters are all written onto a land grant for Rancho Refugio, which is where we stand today. And an important thing to add some context to this story is that, remember, we're not standing in California, we're not standing in the United States, we are standing in Alta California, we're standing in Mexico. And why that's so important is they actually had much more liberal laws on land ownership when it applied to women. So here we are in 1839, and in Mexican California, Alta California, 3, now let's say prominent women are deeded this large land grant. In America, that would not have been possible in the United States of America. Now, 1848, we end up having legalization of married women owning land in the United States. So we're behind that, and that's only applies to if a married woman were to be widowed and have that land be left to them. So that wasn't even saying that a woman could go out and buy their own property. It was saying that in the case that a married woman was left a property because her husband were to be deceased, that land could be then moved over to the name and title of the widow. So just to put in perspective just a little bit how far behind we actually were in this one regard. So 39, 3 Castro daughters are on the initial land grant. And another important thing happens in 39, at least for Bolcoff. He becomes the administrator at Mission Santa Cruz. So the mission system has already been secularized, so it's no longer a religious institution. And Bolcoff is the manager, the administrator is the title that they had for him. So he becomes yet another prominent, role in local kind of Santa Cruz County politics. And at that point, they also Maria and Jose Antonio Bolcoff, they move on to Rancho Refugio. They start living here, and they build some structures. And we're only left with small evidence of what was here. And you can only see really a little bit of this building, but it's not that big. And that's a pretty good indicator that there would have been more here, because it's really just not that big. And when you combine that with the fact that Maria and Jose Antonio had 17 children, and that's right, 17, this probably would not have been their only residence. So in addition to the 17 kids they had, they also lived with Maria's 2 sisters, as well as Indian servants that lived on the property. So They lived, this house, or this building, the Adobe that's behind me, we don't know for sure exactly what it was built for. But one very possible explanation is that this was built as kind of a wedding fandango house, and that would have been for Maria's older sister, who ended up getting married and lived here until her marriage. So when that marriage happened, they think that maybe this was built for that purpose. So one of the sisters ends up marrying and moving off the property. The other one actually becomes a nun, moves to Monterey. So we have this like building history here of all these different Castros living on the property, and Bolcoff is making a pretty good living for himself in a number of diversified different economic activities. So not only is he, has his job in town as the administrator for the mission, he also is, he begins dairying, and he also gets into milling, lumber milling, and is raising livestock. He's growing vegetables and selling them, largely potatoes, onions. So he's kind of bringing this little bit of Russia into Alta California culture. So at the time, it would have actually been quite rare to find butter. While there'd been cattle here for quite a while because of the mission grazing land, the cattle that were here were used primarily for meat, tallow, and leather. So they weren't dairying cattle. So Bolcoff brings to market this very kind of sought after butter, milk, and potatoes, and these other kind of staples of Russia. And there was another place in the relative area that you could get butter, and that was actually Fort Ross. So quite a ways north of us, but that's kind of interesting to think about because that would have been the Russian settlement. So interesting to think about how something like that we would take for granted as being normal, like butter, would have been something that would be hard to come by at that time, at least in this region. So Bolcoff and he's distributing his butter and other products pretty far. So there are records of him selling these high quality products in Monterey and also up to San Francisco. So a wide range that he is selling these products. And so you'd think with this diversification of his economic activities, he would have been, pretty ready for anything life threw at him as far as finances go. But unfortunately for him, he fell into some dire financial situations. And that it comes back to him trying to basically stake his legitimacy as him being the title owner of this land. So before I talked about how the 3 Castro daughters were on the original land title. Well, on one that was submitted to the U.S. as they're trying to take in these land acquisitions from Mexico and move them over to the U.S., they're looking at Bolcoff's, and there's extensive legal fees that go into his battle to say that he is the legitimate owner of this land. And it was in 1841, Governor Alvarado down in Monterey, so this is still Alta California, proclaims that it is in fact that Bolcoff is the legitimate owner of this land. And of course we have other records that show that the 3 women having their name on there. But either way, this is what the governor decrees and gives the land to Bolcoff. But it was so expensive paying for all these lawyers to advocate for his cause for this, to get this legitimacy of title acknowledged. He ends up having to parcel off land and take out loans. And he does so from a man named Moses Meter. And Moses Meter, he ends up borrowing a pretty large sum of money, and he's unable to pay it back. I'm switching us around just so we can take a look at the Meter home, because this is the house, the 1859 house, Gothic Revival style home that was built by Moses Meter, who only got this land because Bolcoff was unable to pay back his debts. So we have this really long history of dairying that goes back all the way to before statehood, when we were still part of Mexico, and even really kind of predates the culture here, because at the time butter wasn't something you could get easily. So it's a fun story that we kind of can let our imagination fill some of the maybe holes that we don't have in primary source information. But just the idea of this man coming all the way from Siberia and adapting to this life in Mexican California and rising up to prominence and having it all taken away is just an incredible story of the hard work and also what we put at risk when we put ourselves into a place of change. So that is what I had to share today about Bolcoff. And I hope that story was fun for you and kind of brings a little bit into perspective just the wide range of different histories that all kind of come together when you visit Wilder Ranch State Park. We have this connection to the Yupi people and this connection to the Adobe in the Mexican period, going into this dairying tradition that eventually brings us to the Wilders and where we are today with this incredible cultural resource as well as natural resource for people to recreate and enjoy and preserve. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day weekend.